Call signs fancy.
All right, welcome to episode 9 of the Without Equal podcast. I'm your host, Rob McQueen. I'm joined by my co-hosts and fellow co-founders of Cinepari, Steve Cargill and Chris Perry. So today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to step away from our normal follow, kind of take different approaches and looks at leadership and discuss those. And we're going to break the mold and we're going to start our special segment on Ukraine. I think we all understand that Ukraine is a critical event happening in our world right now, and it's got a lot of different facets. So we're going to kick this off with a small walk down memory lane, kind of do what we would call a road to war in the military, see how we got here, and then start to discuss some of the different perspectives that we have and that we see out there right now. This is going to lead us to a few special guests we're going to have over the next couple weeks that really have some different perspectives and expertise to lend to this conversation. So right now I'm going to hand it over to my co-host, Steve, and he's going to take us away because he's got the historical perspective and see how we got here. Steve, it's all yours.
Hey, so yeah, it's interesting. You know, looking at Vladimir Putin as the leader of Russia, he is quoted as saying that the greatest geopolitical tragedy of the 20th century was the fall of the Soviet Union. So that, coupled with his demeanor, which has been shaped by his career as a KGB agent back in the 80s, really lends itself to where we are today, because he has a chip on his shoulder and he wants to make Russia great to make up for its downfall as the Soviet Union and the breaking apart of those 15 different nations from that one monolith that was the USSR. And so he's been able to build a cult of personality and drive the whole of government approach by Russia to take advantage of geopolitical situations around Russia's periphery in order to be able to claw back little by little what the former glory of the USSR. Glory as in, the respect that it had, not necessarily how great it was in terms of how people's lives were or how effective it was necessarily, but it was feared, it was respected. And so that's the sort of perspective that he leads with now. He likes being feared, he likes being respected, and so he takes actions to feed that. And then also too, he's got this paranoia that NATO is enveloping Russia. At least that's how he's looking to portray things, and that's his narrative. And then also too, he's taking advantage of some historical issues that were seeded by the Soviet Union as the Russian leaders of the Soviet Union looked to consolidate power. What they did was they spreaded ethnic Russians around the former Soviet Union and transferred peoples so that they would have a base from which to draw power upon in these different republics. And so nowadays you've got these ethnic Russians who exist in these countries that border Russia, and Putin can make the excuse, and he's written it up in law, that he needs to protect the equity of these ethnic Russians in these other countries. And so that gives him an excuse to intervene. And he's done so in places like Georgia in 2008. And he's done so in Ukraine in 2014, and again in Ukraine this year. So and what you see there is a trend. So in order to build that respect, attain that former glory, he's taken advantage of these geopolitical issues. For instance, in 2008 in Georgia, following the Olympics, he took advantage of a conflict that was taking place between the Georgian government and South Ossetians. And then the Russians were able to say that they needed to protect their partners there, and that they decided to intervene. And now they've recognized South Ossetia. Russia has. They also recognize the breakaway region of Abkhazia. That's another portion of Georgia, and caused what we refer to as a frozen conflict. And then you've got, fast forward a couple of years later, 2014, following the Olympics, you have the conflict that started up in first in Crimea as the little green men popped up and the Russians moved in to seize the peninsula of Crimea. And then additionally, slightly later, you had the conflict that started in the self-proclaimed regions of Donetsk and Luhansk that is home to a lot of ethnic Russians and allowed Vladimir Putin to say, I need to support these people who are being quote unquote repressed or who are being denigrated in some way. And so when it's hard to say whether or not Russia started that by creating some sort of conflict, having gone cross border or whatever. What they wound up doing is being able to support these breakaway regions. And now fast forward a couple more years, 2022, Vladimir Putin goes ahead and recognizes those two self-proclaimed countries. And now they have official Russian support, extending, promoting another frozen conflict. And the key thing about these frozen conflicts it's a geopolitical game. It's a modus operandi of Russia, the Russian government, and Putin to interfere in the business of these peripheral countries to prevent them from having the ability to join NATO or to join any other alliances. Because particularly with NATO, you can't join if you've already got a conflict ongoing. You can't enter a peaceful alliance if you have a conflict. And so that is a bit of insurance for Russia to prevent those countries from being able to enter that alliance and then have that buffer state. Russia is huge on having a buffer region between it and the West, which was always the case with, you go back hundreds of years. You had Poland was absorbed by Russia in order to create a buffer area as it was absorbed into the Russian Empire. And for the Soviet Union later on, you had those satellite states, Poland again being one of them, and the Baltics, et cetera, to create that buffer between Russia and the West. So there's always this need for a little bit of comfort when it comes to dealing with the West, and that's what this is affording him. So just a little bit of history on that there.
Yeah, Steve, jumping in on that, I think when you hit on Putin and his initial thought process and really his paranoia surrounding NATO, which I think if you look at the narrative that this is a war or a special military operation because of Western aggression and the aggressive expansion of NATO, do you think that paranoia that sits inside of Putin is kind of leading very much to that kind of thought process of creating that buffer space through frozen conflict and in this case expanding a very aggressive conflict directly into Ukraine?
Yeah, I think paranoia plays a large role with Putin, because as being a former KGB agent, you are paranoid with everything that you do, hoping that you're able to keep your actions from being observed, seen, known by others. And so, absolutely, he has this demeanor about him of there's always someone trying to get at him, or at least that's how he wants to portray it, so he can create a narrative that works in such a way that he can make these moves and have the actions be in some way legalistically or otherwise right according to Russian law, however he's managed to craft it over the years, or by some sort of unusual pseudo-moral grounds. And so his paranoia definitely contributes to his actions in my estimation. And also too, with paranoia, you want to feel safe, right? So you surround yourself with people you feel safe with. And what does that mean? In this case, I think he's got a lot of sycophants that he surrounded himself by, and a lot of yes men that facilitate his actions. So that also contributes to the current situation where you think when you enter in an engagement or you take some actions, you want to think out the branches and sequels. You want to see if this then that to death to figure out, all right, what is going to come, the second and third order effects of my decisions. In the current conflict, it seems that he may not have gone all the way through that in developing that analysis, or listening to that analysis, or having somebody who's willing to provide that realistic and pragmatic analysis, because maybe he'll yell at them or fire him or send him off to the gulag.
Let's jump in right there, Steve, because I think that's a good place. We got a good rundown of how we got here, right? We understand Putin. We understand some of the historical events. Let's dive into that spot, which is really right before this kicked off. So let's go into the Olympic timeframe, which is when these conversations really started to look at, and I know we had them amongst ourselves, of what happens after the Olympics. Does he follow that same pattern? So Chris, if you would jump in here and kind of give us an idea and thought process, and let's go through the different perspectives that we saw prior to Putin's move into Ukraine, because I think those different thought processes are being challenged in a lot of ways now, and some people are being proven very right. So let's kind of take a look from there.
One thing that I think is important to talk about too is the ability to establish the narrative. Right. I mean, that's on the global stage. One of the things that I think we've seen it with other dictators before, coming of age, sort of the lack of fully understanding how important the social media, most of them understand the ability to craft a narrative, the ability to sway popular support to whatever cause it is that they're trying to justify. But one of the things is now with social media, a lot of the dictators, or the people that have state-run media, they can really control what their populations see. They're able to say whatever they want, and that becomes the truth, because nobody can report anything different. Nobody can see anything different. However, that doesn't play on the world stage, right? You see, the importance of social media. And that being said, some of the few ways that it is usable, viable, and productive tool is spreading mass awareness. Putin can control the narrative that his people see within the country, but he cannot control what people do outside of Russia. And that stuff is spreading. That's why you see they try to lock down a lot of the internet, a lot of the websites, so that their people cannot have access to seeing what's going on, because they'll immediately realize some of the narratives that he has spun. I remember hearing around that same time frame that there was Ukraine was committing genocide against ethnic Russians. That was one of his big talking points that came up again and again, and that was the need for urgent action and the need to invade. And he really pushed that, and that's, at least to my knowledge, I've seen that nowhere else other than statements by the Russian state, the government entity. So the ability to craft those narratives and have people believe them are critical. However, I think maybe he overestimated the rest of the world's willingness to believe his narrative, the effectiveness that he would be able to have in swaying world population. Because you can say it all you want and your people will believe you. However, when it gets outside of that, it's very quickly shown that that is not the case. And I think even with, originally my understanding, and Steve, please jump in with this too, was from the people I've talked to, some of whom live over there, originally this focused around the two states where there was some breakaway or some elements that wanted, Donetsk and is it Luhansk?
Luhansk, yeah.
Luhansk, yeah. And I think even the world, from what we saw, is they would push and perhaps try to take those two states back. But this turned into a large-scale operation. I mean, you're seeing attacks throughout all of Ukraine. So it escalated quickly. Obviously, those plans had to have been going on long before. I mean, Olympics or those kind of things don't happen overnight. It appears that they underestimated some of their logistical capability, but the battle plans had to have been drawn up, or at least being worked through those permutations for months in advance, if not years. I mean, this thing has probably been on the drawing board for a while. We've seen those intentions for quite a bit of time, but I think that this has been going on for a lot longer than we probably even realize.
Yeah, and anybody with any sort of common sense immediately sees with those sorts of battle plans and the actions taking place on the ground that the narrative is immediately blown when the attacks are taking place throughout the entire country of Ukraine. It's not simply a means of inserting peacekeepers to try to reduce violence against these ethnic Russians. This is an all-out assault against a country, violating its sovereignty and looking to capture it.
Yeah, and it's amazing that it's happening in this day and age. I mean, they invaded a sovereign nation, the likes of which, we haven't, relatively unprovoked, I would say. I mean, they just decided that they wanted it. And again, it's important to understand the optic that they're looking at it through. I mean, growing up in the Cold War time period, much like when we grew up, and the Red Dawn era, and the Russians were the evil empire. I'm sure that America or the West was portrayed similarly to them. So they grew up that way, thinking of, potentially the West as the evil empire. And now if you go back to Brzezinski's, the grand chessboard, specifically with, as it relates to Europe, I mean, Ukraine, the geographical location of Ukraine, especially were it to swing to very pro-West, or the West to have a strong presence in Ukraine, I mean, that's not quite a checkmate, but when you look at it from that perspective, I mean, the distance of Ukraine to Moscow, of course, they're going to feel threatened. And someone who has complete power, complete control, and maybe is operating a little bit outside of his own lines. I don't know where he's been in charge, ultimately in control for so long. I don't know exactly where his head's at, but he can do more or less whatever he wants. So when he feels that threatened, he's going to take action. And
Right.
he, I'm sure, rationalizes or justifies it in his mind. But the narratives that he uses to support that just are not holding true. When they say they're targeting specifically military infrastructure, yet we watch hundreds of bombs falling in specifically civilian locations, civilian high rises. The amount of catastrophic loss of life, completely unnecessary, that they're reaching far and beyond even what was initially intended, from what I understood of what I've seen of his talking points early on. I mean, this has just gone full scale quickly.
So
Right.
I kind of want to jump in because I think, Chris, a key part to that narrative, and something that really sits with me is prior to him moving in and launching this full-scale assault and full-scale invasion, there was a lot of conversation in back and forth with friends of mine who work in the area, from the area, or just have military experience training individuals in that area. And really came down to, my thought process was that a lot of rhetoric and kind of the threats of sanctions and basically laying out our response to Putin more or less gave him a decision to make, which to me is, here I am. I have my playbook of hybrid warfare. I understand what I've done in 2014. I understand what the response has been. Sanctions, more or less appeasement, not really push back. So now I see sanctions again. I can look at the time frame of those sanctions, say I probably have about 30 days before they make a large impact. And then you get the math, and then you get down to what Steve said earlier, which is surrounding yourself with yes men. So you have this thought process of like, okay, so I have a window, sanctions won't hit for so long. And if I can get a government in that time, or if I can control the space in that time, then I can probably negate the impact of those sanctions in that time frame. And that was the way I saw it playing out. That was the way in my mind I saw it playing out. And that's what I thought, because I thought he would stick to his normal place and maybe jump a little heavier in, because I thought he would just chip away at Ukraine the way he could. I thought he would just secure small pieces, let the sanctions run over, and then slowly do it over time.
More or less just absorb.
Right. Just slowly absorb it, right? Slowly absorb those pieces of land and just continue the playbook that's been successful for him. So what I wonder is did he see an opportunity where, I think the yes men on the military side who've worked on these plans for a while said, hey, Ukraine is not going to stand. We will have it in a short period of time, which, looking at where they're at now militarily, I believe that's what they thought was going to happen. I do not think they were prepared for a long-term military engagement in Ukraine. I thought there was going to be a turn. They thought that it was going to be a turnover quickly. So you have these kind of two thought processes. Like, I have this window where sanctions are not going to impact me, and I have this belief that I can take Ukraine quickly. And that's really what I think triggered that, because I don't know, I have a hard time watching the way that he's played chess on a geopolitical stage for a long period of time and been very successful, because this is a major miscalculation from what I see. So I think prior to, I was shocked to see this massive push all the way into Ukraine. But that's from my small perspective.
I don't think we can underestimate either the Afghanistan situation, with the method and manner in which not just we, but the collective we pulled out from Afghanistan. he may have calculated that the world was not ready for another large-scale engagement, that people would not be ready to jump back in, or that the popular support would not be there, and he could overwhelm quickly and establish new rule. But we've seen a lot of response to the sympathy and the plight of the Ukrainian people.
Yeah, that's a good argument there. That after 20 plus years of conflict, that the United States people, the people in Europe, those NATO partners, constituencies, that they definitely were tired of war and are not interested. And so, but that's different from saying that they're not interested in protecting freedom, that they're not interested in protecting their turf or what they believe to be right. You might be war weary, but you're certainly looking to maintain order to some extent. And then, back on that topic, Rob, of what our expectations were. I agree that Putin has been playing chess and playing it well for the past couple of years, and being able to gain this strategic advantage through various means, using special services, Spetsnaz, whatever, hybrid warfare, in order to chip away and gain ground in the chaos. But my thoughts were that he would use one of those legalistic sort of arguments for being able to do what I expected him to do, which was look to either occupy, annex, or chip away at the breakaway regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. And so by recognizing them as independent countries, if you go in there, it's not invasion. They're your allies. They've invited you in, so you're there at their behest, essentially. And that legalistic sort of thinking would allow him to make a move in those regions. But by going beyond that, he's blown his narrative, and certainly he's blown away what my expectations were too. So, but yeah, it's amazing too with narratives and the ability to share information through the social media, like Chris was talking about, because that's where support is coming from, by the awareness that's been generated by the social media. You've got just regular people who are contributing. I saw that there's a NASCAR team owner in Richard Childress who is a board member of Ammo Inc., and he's donating 1 million rounds, 7.62, like essentially retooling, influencing the retooling of the shop of that organization to send 1 million rounds 7.62 in the country. That's amazing, and that's what awareness and just not. You don't want to allow a tyrant to gain geopolitical advantage. You don't want to see people suffer, and people are taking that to heart all over the world.
I think a key part to that too, Steve, is you have to give credit to the Ukrainian people in getting to that point, right? Because there were quite a few people in countries, in Germany, I think, is a perfect example, where they sat and watched. They're like, we're not going to commit anything until we see what happens in that kind of initial window. Like, let's see what happens. And I think you have to give Zelensky and the Ukrainian people and the resistance that they're putting up a huge, I mean, that is what is driving this support from the outside. Because if they'd gone down in 3 days, they hadn't resisted, I think most of the world would have done exactly what Putin kind of thought from previous things. It would have been capitulation. It would have been appeasement. And we kind of would have moved on, and maybe some sanctions and the economic piece of things and diplomatic. But what we're seeing now is absolutely not that. And when you see Germany shipping lethal aid, when you see Turkey sending lethal aid, you are seeing a global alignment that I think is very, very much tied to that Ukrainian resistance and identity.
Well, because I think additionally he definitely crossed a line. Again, going back to Donetsk and Luhansk are predominantly ethnically Russian. Like, I think if he had played it in a way where he really pushed to take those two for various reasons, and with Russian majority of the population, there may have been, had he not crossed that line. But once he started attacking Ukrainians writ large, and I think a lot of people underestimate or don't understand, especially in the West, the national identity of Ukrainians versus Russians. I mean, a lot of people kind of lump them in together, but Ukrainians are a very distinct, proud people with a separate heritage, a separate history, and they're very aware of that, much more so than a lot of people in the West are, like how distinct Ukrainians are from Russians. Because in America, if they're speaking English, they have kind of the same accent. As we tend to do, we kind of lump people into groups. But over there, I mean, it's hugely different and extremely significant between the Ukrainians and the Russians, and we're seeing that once they were able to solidify and inspire that Ukrainian national identity, that is what has seen them this far into the conflict.
Yeah, so with that, I'm incredibly proud to see them being a proud, nationality, a people, and being as resilient as they are. And nothing against the Ukrainians, but simply because of our current world dynamic, the way that society writ large in the West has moved. I was really apprehensive with the idea of war looming, of how anybody might react. Is anybody going to be bothered enough to put their phone down, to step away from the computer, to get off the couch, to stop watching TV and being sucked into social media and all these things, to bother to save their own ass? And I am in shock, honestly, because I wonder about that about anybody. But I'm incredibly proud to see that they've stood up, they've banded together, and that people of all ilks are picking up a rifle to protect their home. And that's what I would hope of anybody, particularly against this reckless aggression.
And people who don't have to either, right? I mean, there are sports stars, there are actors and actresses. I mean, people who could very easily stay in a safe place in their mansions and send money over or do funding campaigns to support the war, but they're not. They're actually going home, risking it all to support their homeland and their brothers and sisters, their familial, their family members in that country. I mean, the identity it's amazing to see. You're absolutely right, Steve.
Well, I think just on that too, Chris, it's not just the people they're picking up arms there. I think from what I saw this morning, Ukrainians said 16,000 foreign enlistments have come in over the past week. So I mean, this is a growth and a movement, and this is where I think there's an interesting piece that is going to be kind of dissected over time, because I think you could argue that U.S. and globally we were pretty divided, and also not just from NATO and the U.S. and 20 years of war, but I really think when you look at COVID and the pandemic, I think there's probably a coin flip there of like, is everyone so beat up and so down and in such a rough place that they cannot respond to this? But it reminds me kind of a 9/11 style scenario where when people are down, everything's tough, everything's rough, but then a singular event happens that gives a common enemy or just a common piece of compassion and empathy and purpose that people can unite behind. And that is what I'm seeing in the Ukraine, really from Ukraine. Like you could say they're uniting against Putin, but that's not really what I see. What I see is people uniting in support of Ukraine. And that could have been a 50-50 shot based on the state of the world right now. But that's an impressive thing to see.
Yeah, and all that is personified in President Zelensky. He's demonstrating incredible leadership. He's engaging everybody by being on the ground, leading by example. And what you expect of a leader is that a leader needs to be able to do everything that subordinates or those around them would do. And so he's on the ground with everybody and demonstrating by example what you need to do in order to be successful, and that's take part and be engaged against this enemy and work together. And so he's reaching out in order to garner support, and his example has drawn in those 16,000. I find it hard to believe that those individuals would have shown up if they didn't believe that there was a chance, and that chance has been sparked by Zelensky's efforts.
Well, it's definitely an American theme, definitely throughout Hollywood and movies and everything else, but I don't think it's exclusively so. I think it's a humanitarian sort of thing, or humanity theme of rooting for that scrappy underdog, right? Especially when that underdog is righteous. How many Hollywood movies are not made about something of that sort, right? It's a very popular theme, and it resonates with people, I think, across cultures that struggle for, the righteous underdog to succeed, to triumph over adversity, over the odds. And that's what we're seeing exemplified before us in this struggle. Conventionally, Ukrainian military versus the Russian military, it's an unwinnable war. Just empirically, if you look at it, strictly a conventional fight, it's not even a fight, really, if Russia is able to bring its full forces to bear. But there's so many more complexities to that, and that's where the humanity piece comes into it, which again, I think is maybe what the Russian state did not anticipate. The resonance that has occurred with the rest of the world regarding Ukraine's struggles.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of variables, that are involved, particularly on the Russian military side. We know that they've invested a lot in their special services and their Spetsnaz and hybrid warfare, which has done a lot in order to gain that geopolitical advantage for Putin over the past 20 years, and he's gained those successes. And I don't know, maybe because of that, he's developed some sort of hubris. But I feel that he does have an understanding that his military, conventional military, like that of the Soviet Union, is a hollow shell. It's got a hard exterior, but on the inside, once you tap through that thin veneer, you're going to see how rotten it is, and we're seeing how rotten it is right now. The conventional military is largely comprised of conscripts, and so these people don't serve more than 2 years. So that's hardly a professional. And the life as a conscript is shit. It is terrible. There's hazing. There's no esprit de corps. It's not a professional organization. And these people really aren't invested in what they're doing. And we're seeing that with, these video clips of these soldiers after they've run out of gas, they've run out of food, and the local Ukrainians are taking pity on them and letting them call home on their cell phones, while they're crying and, lost. And so you see that a professional soldier likely would not do that. A professional military likely would not allow itself to be compromised in that way, because they've thought through all of the things that are necessary to not run out of fuel and things like that. So with that, there's a Russian mentality that they don't want to lose, they cannot lose, and so the idea is that, all right, well, if things begin to not go their way conventionally, there's the nukes, which is that trump card out there that they can pull. They've got a lot of nukes, but even Putin knows that he doesn't want to use his nukes, and so I think what he's doing by putting the nukes on alert is it's saber rattling, and it's a means to bring somebody to the table to try to save face in this situation, because it's obviously not going the way he wants it to. And he obviously thought that he was able to set the conditions well enough with all those actions before going hot, that despite how bad his conventional forces are, that they would be able to accomplish the objective. That just doesn't seem to be the case at the moment.
No. So I'm at a point here where I think we could probably continue this conversation for hours and go. But as this is going to be kind of a continuing theme for at least the next week with guests and stuff, I kind of want to touch on the narrative. I think let's jump to the narrative that Ukraine has created, because I think that's, as we've kind of all chatted about, that's essential to this response for Ukraine. And then I kind of want to do a most likely, most dangerous, and kind of do our predictions and thoughts on what's going to happen and go around the horn. And I think that'll get us to a good spot where we can start bringing in some guests and really continue this conversation over the next couple of weeks. Hopefully less, because hopefully this is done in the next few days and this doesn't continue to drag out. But does that sound good to you guys? You think we can do that?
Absolutely.
All right, so let's go with the narrative. And I want to hit on this because I think Ukraine and Zelensky have absolutely knocked the media game out of the park. And so let's go with the first one, which to me I think is the most badass messaging I've seen, whether it's true or not, is the Ghost of Kiev. So if you're not familiar with the Ghost of Kiev, Google it. This is basically the kind of golden hero of Ukraine at this point. Apparently, a pilot who shot down six different Russian aircraft in air-to-air combat after being shot out of one. Like, the entire piece is just crazy from two different airframes, and so they've done an amazing job, I think, of pushing that forward. So, quick thoughts on that. And one, ask a question: do you think it's true? Do you think he's real?
It's hard to say, but it's always good to have an epic hero to rally around and somebody to look up to, because, even for the Ukrainians, it may wind up being that, young boys wind up having to pick up a gun. And if they're inspired to, because of that, that ghost of Kiev, then, maybe that'll be the thing that pushes them to success in the end. But, it's a rallying cry, and they're able to garner support and push through adversity, because they know that, they've got essentially in this case, a guardian angel up there who's working to take care of that aerial threat for that.
And it may be a compilation of multiple individuals. We've seen that before. I mean, you go back to some of the Russian, Finnish snipers back in World War II. Sometimes it wasn't just one man's actions, but they were lumped together to create an idea. But either way, it's been successful in exposing the weakness of the Russian forces, right? I mean, the brand new super attack helicopter that they put out, right, that China has a bunch of them on order. I think they've downed 2 or 3 of those things relatively easily with surface-to-air missiles recently. So, I mean, it's shaking up the security and the supremacy of the Russian forces. And any chink in that kind of armor, especially when you're in this David and Goliath, or, the superior force and the underdog, any of those kind of things add up to it's a rallying cry and a morale boost for those that will continue. And it enables them or encourages them to continue to fight, which is the last thing you want if you're the aggressor or the occupying force, right? So it's been successful either way.
Yeah, I think, what was it? And I still remember the name from, I can't remember the name, Enemy at the Gates or whatever it was, but Vasily Zaitsev is the sniper you're talking about.
Right,
like that
exactly.
Compilation of multiple snipers that were put into one legend that terrified the Germans, and, still a legend to this day. I think that's an incredible piece. I think the other one, too, we have to look at is the use of celebrities staying to fight, and then kind of the media narrative, which I think has been amazing, which is we're all here to fight. And I think that the common theme is, like, we're not professional soldiers. We weren't bred for war, but we're here to fight for our freedom. And I think that's an amazing narrative. How long do you guys think that's going to last? And do we think that that's going to hold true?
Well, I think that their influence is going to continue long beyond, like, even if they die. I think that the aura of what they've decided to take on will inspire many long beyond their existence, because they don't have to do this. They're rich. They're successful. They could have easily evacuated, but instead, they're patriotic as well. So, they're demonstrating that no matter who you are, no matter what your means, this is something. There's meaning in what we're doing right here, and the meaning is
Absolutely. And I mean, the legacy of martyrdom frequently, long outlasts, an individual's, existence frequently. I mean, even if they had not served as martyrs, you look at some of these internet, the couple that just got married and then went and picked up their AKs and then went to fight. I mean, viral, and it will continue to be so. And that stuff is out in the internet, in the sphere now, and it will be in perpetuity. That's never going away. So it'll maintain relevance for as long as these kind of struggles go on, and it'll serve as an inspiration.
Inspiration. And if there's ever a good copycat thing, this is what would inspire good copycat actions, and that's exactly what they're looking for. Take on this example and exemplify it yourself.
Truly exemplifying, right, the selfless service and the putting something higher than yourself, which is greatly lacking in a lot of society today. So exemplifying that, and then again, Zelensky is kind of the pinnacle of that. I mean, all that we've seen from the Ukrainian people, but Zelensky as well, just kind of being paramount on top of all of those other Ukrainians. I mean, it's all come together into one cohesive theme that I think is and will continue to be extremely effective.
Yeah, he really is the tip of the spear in that. I kind of want to give a shout out to those that the celebrities that have kind of fallen short of this. I don't know if you guys ever watched Dancing with the Stars, but Maxim Shmirkovsky, I think a two-time champion, was caught trying to flee Ukraine away from us, trying to make it back to the U.S., and so they arrested his ass. So I think the theme is going to hold true, and you're going to be martyred one way or the other, and he's not going to be on the positive side of that.
Right, because I believe, what is it that women and children are allowed to leave, but basically military age males are
16 to 60 are not
required
allowed
to stay
leave.
in the
Yep,
country.
required to stay in the country, which I think is fantastic.
And then that brings up another point too, is that through these recent talks between the Ukrainian side of the Ukrainian officials, Russian officials in Belarus, they did come up with an agreement to allow for a corridor, a humanitarian corridor for that exit. Just knowing the Russian mentality and the Putin psyche, I would take that with a grain of salt, any sort of agreement, because what you're doing by agreeing to something like that is agreeing to something definitive that could be manipulated or affected. And that the Russians are not, they don't play by rules necessarily. They take advantage where they can. So I would be very wary of and look to guard that concession so that they're not taken advantage of.
Yeah, and I think we all know too, humanitarian corridors have notoriously been leveraged for, at a bare minimum, smuggling and transportation of supplies and people. So, yeah, thinking that that's an easy out and an easy answers with the Russians is absolutely, it's not going to happen that way.
It's a huge vulnerability and liability too that can and will be exploited and has to be overseen as well.
Man, all right. So I think this is a good time. Let's do most likely, most dangerous. So for those of you tuning in, most likely, most dangerous is done in analysis for missions when you look at the enemy and what you think they're going to do. So most likely, when you're looking at it from an enemy's perspective, is what you think the enemy will do, and then you plan accordingly. Most dangerous is what they will do that is the worst option for you. So most dangerous for you as the adversary to the enemy. So who wants to start? I can kick this one off. I have a good idea with it. Chris, all right. Chris, hands up. Chris, what do you got, man? Send it.
Either way, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, I think the Russians, unimpeded, will continue along what they're trying to do. They have a battle plan. They're going to try to stick to it, because deviating from their intentions is going to show weakness in their, in their mind or in their perception of themselves to the world. So continue nugging out what they're doing, at least until some circumstances change. And then most dangerous, I think, is nukes. I mean, without a doubt, in my opinion, is the employment of tactical nuclear weapons, because the effects of that, I mean, we've even seen it with, the fact that they launched a decisive engagement against the largest nuclear power plant in Europe shows that they're not too concerned about they had to know that there's a potential for that thing to go. I mean, with it catching on fire anyways, as it was, but they were just determined to take it. Again, putting their head down and executing their plan regardless of consequences. And the fact that they were potentially okay with the thing, going nuclear. And I mean, because I've heard it would have been on order above Chernobyl, the effects of it. And then you look at, depending on which way the wind's going and everything else, the effects that would have on all of Europe. So they're not afraid of the nuclear side of things. So the employment of tactical nukes, I think, from my opinion, would be the most dangerous, the effects that would have.
Yeah, so I would say that you need to look at the Chechen wars first and second to see what the Russians likely will do. They'll continue to just push through with brute force, throw men at the problem, shell indiscriminately to cause fear, to try to cause the population to quell, and because also too they don't have the precision capability that say the United States has. I've heard in reporting that they've got capability that's decades behind the United States, so that would cause them to need to get even closer to targets. And so, they'll continue to just shell from afar and try to instill fear. And that, I think the most dangerous thing might also come just simply from the most likely, in that the indiscriminate nature of what they're doing and the reckless behavior that they're exhibiting in attacking a nuclear power plant could wind up causing grave consequences beyond simply the nuclear power plant being destroyed by itself. That would involve the West would become involved. I feel at that point because that's just completely unacceptable. And also too, that would have a huge consequence on the Russian population. If you look just downwind on the other side of the border from the Ukraine is Russia, so those people would be affected, and so that's where the controlling the narrative comes into play again, where those people just don't have any idea what's going on, and so they can't say that, hey, you shouldn't be over there doing what you're doing because it's going to affect us. They don't have that opportunity. So.
Yep. So I think I'm kind of a mix between the two of you. So I think the most likely is that they're going to put their head down, they're going to nug forward and continue the plan. But I think in response to the sanctions, they're going to increase their cyber attacks and offensive cyber capability, particularly against Germany and the European countries that are really going to feel the brunt of the global sanctions, that are going to saddle most of that burden. I think that's where they'll do that. Most dangerous, I think, Steve, is pretty close to you, but I think if Putin pushes as hard as he can and he's not gaining the ground, I think potentially sabotaging and causing a leak or some sort of damage from one of those nuclear facilities to give him a reason to withdraw. That is in a way of saving his peace. He achieves his end state of creating that border, even though it's through absolutely wiping Ukraine from being habitable. But I think that would be his probably most dangerous of getting out of there. I don't think, knowing just kind of looking at the state of the Russian military, what my faith in their nuclear capability is, and him understanding that I don't care who's in the White House. If you fire a ballistic nuclear missile somewhere and you use tactical nukes, it is the end of Russia as we know it, and most likely the world as we know it. So I don't know that he would push that button. So I think most dangerous is actually going to be him sabotaging one of those nuclear facilities inside Ukraine.
Yeah, and it'll be one of those, plausible deniability, legalistic sort of excuses,
Exactly.
And he'll try to just, give it the stiff arm and peel back. Yeah.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see if their air umbrella holds. I mean, that's with the influx of surface-to-air missiles that are being pushed in. I mean, that's been a big part of them able to, their failure to plan logistics or whatever the logistical holdup. They have that 40-mile train of stalled vehicles that is only there are attack aviation pilots around the world drooling watching that thing. I can only assume it has not been wiped off the face of the map because of their air defense umbrella. So if that comes down, I think it could be a game changer too. So we'll see.
Well, I think, and that aspect too is they're losing Gen 4, and I don't think they've lost any Gen 5, but they're losing Gen 4 fighters to surface-to-air missiles and manpads. That's a big deal. So we'll see how this kind of holds out in Russia. But man, I think we've done a pretty good intro to this, and I'm excited for the rest of this. We have some pretty amazing guests coming on, from PhD candidates to senior leaders in SOCOM to former defense attachés. So this is going to be a really interesting conversation and series as we move forward. So we're going to go around the horn, and then I'll drop a little bit of a shout out to 2 humanitarian organizations that are doing work in and around Ukraine right now that are worthy of your support. We'll go from there. So Steve, I'll pass it off to you for final words, and we'll go around the horn.
Yeah, this is unprecedented action, and it's led to incredible consequences already. You've got a huge influx of refugees that are flooding into Europe, Poland in particular, and that's another aspect of Russian tactics. Is they've caused issues down in Syria to help exacerbate the migrant flow up into Europe, and now there's another migrant flow out of Ukraine into the rest of Europe to continue destabilization in Europe. So there's so many facets to this current problem, and there's so much that could be done to counter it. And so hopefully we can there can be some resolution and some coalition to get a positive end to this.
And I'd just like to say I love talking to you guys. I love having these chats. The 3 of us are cut somewhat from the same cloth, and we feel the same way about a lot of things. I cannot wait to look to, one, hear from the listeners and their points of view, but also the upcoming week and the people we have lined up. I cannot wait to hear the opinions of people who have so much experience in this area, in this arena. I can't wait to hear the insight and, the talking points that come out of this. I'm just really looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for tuning in. This has been our introduction. So like, subscribe, follow along, listen to this conversation. We're going to drop a lot more episodes over the next week than we normally do. So please tune in. And if you're looking to support, reach out and take a look at, I'll drop in the show notes, World Central Kitchens. Your chef, Jose Andres, worked with them personally in the Bahamas, an incredible organization. They're working chefs with Ukraine. That link will be in there. And then Off the Grid Missions, a humanitarian organization that focuses specifically on the hard of hearing and deaf communities around the world. They are activating to support the deaf communities that are currently inside of Ukraine and in the shelling areas. So please go ahead and take a look at those two organizations that are in the show notes and support if you feel inclined. But thank you so much for tuning in. Really do. The next conversations, as Chris said, I'm really looking forward to them, and I hope you join us for those throughout the next week or two. So cheers and have a good day.
Cheers.